Hi, Donovan.
Thanks, Trey.
All right, so what are we looking at?
You're looking at the first question. Okay, what is the first question? What kind of essay is that?
Synthesis.
Synthesis. So when we talk about synthesis, what do we mean? When we synthesize information, what are we doing?
Putting sources together with a common theme.
Okay, putting sources together, maybe with a common theme to do what?
Prove a point.
To prove a point, to support your argument. So if you pay very close attention to the prompt, it can give you a whole lot of hints of some things that you could have in your essay. So take a look at the very first paragraph of the prompt, and I want you to underline anything that would be useful for your essay in particular.
What should we do if we don't have our essay?
That's fine. You don't really need the essay part. We're really just looking at the prompts. You're looking at the prompt. First paragraph in the prompt.
I thought we were looking at it.
What does the prompt give us that you could translate into your essay if you wanted to? So what stands out in there that you could use, Tyler?
In the first part of the prompt, it says, monuments honor moments of great achievement, while in other cases, monuments pay homage to a deep sacrifice. So it's like pointing out the two different reasons for them.
Okay, so it tells us the purpose for monuments. What does that last sentence do for us? A monument's size, location, and materials are all consideration in planning and creating a memorial to the past. Katie?
It's kind of giving us like 3 directions.
It gives you 3 directions. You could have used those 3 if you had just paid attention to that part of the prompt. Doesn't mean you have to use those 3, but it's given you 3. Why not go ahead and use them? All right, go to that second paragraph. What stands out to you there that you could potentially use to help your essay out before you even write it? Look at that for a second. So what's in there that we can use? What's it telling us? Drew?
The last part was talking about like examine the factors that a group or agency should consider in memorializing an event or person and creating a monument.
Yeah, so this is giving us exactly what we're writing about. So you are examining factors a group or agency should consider in memorializing an event or a person, and in creating a monument. Circle that and. That was something that we missed. Some people chose to write an essay about what we should consider when memorializing an event or a person, which was great, but it left out what? The creation aspect. Or some people went the other way and focused on the creation of the monument and not what should be considered when you're memorializing a person or an event. So what factors could we have used? Connect back to that first paragraph. Yeah, the factors, size, location, materials, gave that to us. All right, let's look at this last paragraph. What can you use to help you set up your essay from that? Katie?
Avoid summarizing the sources.
Yes. Avoid merely summarizing the sources. Why don't we want to summarize the sources?
It's just repeating.
It's just repeating. They've already read these sources. We don't need to regurgitate that back. What else is important? How many sources do you have to have? What? 3. That's from the paragraph before. What else do you have to do with these sources from that paragraph? You have to cite them. And that was something that a few people had a little bit of issues with. You were using the sources, but you weren't explicitly citing the sources. Like you weren't saying, according to source A, or at the end of the quote, giving source A in parentheses. You'd give details from a source, but then never say where it was from. That's a problem. You have to be very explicit. Okay, let's talk about sources. So go back into your packet. Look at source A. What was source A about?
Monuments provided a more intimate, like, learning experience than a written word, I guess.
Yeah, it provides a more individual, more personal experience. What about source B? What was that one?
It's Christopher Columbus.
It's a picture of Christopher Columbus. I have a serious issue with using this one. Why? Tell me why. There's what?
Context, there's pictures.
There's no context. What else?
Because he, like,
used a lot.
Confuse people.
Okay, so what we know about Columbus now, maybe some people think maybe he shouldn't be memorialized. That's not really my problem I have with it. Ryan?
So are you trying to say like some of these things will have things you shouldn't use?
Maybe not that you shouldn't use, but use them in a way that's like a counter. So like this one you could say maybe is a bad example of a memorial to a person because it's a memorial of Christopher Columbus in Pennsylvania. The location's weird, right? Like why is there a memorial to Christopher Columbus in Pennsylvania? It's just weird. So you could use that as an example of why you should consider location and that maybe being not the appropriate location for it. Does that make sense?
They don't even think of it that way.
So that's why we went back into the sources. A lot of people use source C, which that's a good one. The one about Crazy Horse and Mount Rushmore. And how Mount Rushmore was kind of almost like graffiti. I don't know that anyone used source D. So let's look at source D. Because I really don't think I had anyone who used it. So that is Cemetery Faces an Uncertain Future. From the Whittier Daily News, July 25th, 2004. So, this one says, Grandma Mary Pallet must be turning in her grave. The bones of Pallet, 1796 to 1889, and thousands of other San Gabriel Valley pioneers buried at Savannah Memorial Park could be moved to make way for a future development. Unless something happens and we get the money from somewhere, I don't know how we're going to make it, said Rosie Gutierrez, treasurer for El Monte Cemetery Association. which owns the 4-acre graveyard at 9263 Valley Boulevard. The association has enough money to keep the place open at least 2 years, and Bob Brush, vice president of the association and a Garvey School District board member. Developers have an eye for the cemetery site, and the community of Asian businesses and residents nearby would like to see it gone because they think it brings bad luck, Brush added. But Savannah is rich in history and should be preserved, Brush argues. So why do you think people didn't use this one?
I used it.
You used it? Why? How did you use it?
I used it because I was comparing, I thought that because, it is a memorial, but because it was closing, it was disrespectful to what it was trying to represent in the first place.
Okay. So somebody tell me, why do you think people maybe shied away from this one? It's what? It's boring? Too long? I think people might have had a hard time connecting this idea of a cemetery to an idea of a memorial. You think big memorials, national memorials, but this is a very personal memorial with lots of things to consider in it as well. That could have been a good one to use. Okay. Here's what I want you to do. If you have your actual essay with you, I want you to go back through it, and I want you to find or think about 3 things you could do for your essay to make it better.
We're answering this right now.
Yes, I want you to write it on here. So if you've got your essay, go back through it. Okay, let's look at the second prompt. I think this is the one that people by far struggled with the most. This is question 2. This is your rhetorical analysis. So don't get caught up in this word rhetorical. For some reason, we're all intimidated when we say we're going to do a rhetorical analysis. All that means is you're analyzing what the author's doing to get their message across. You're just looking at their writing. What are they doing? And you don't necessarily have to give me a big long list of devices that are being used. You don't have to mention a device at all. You can still get an 8 or 9 and not say a word like anadiplosis or, epilepsis. You don't even have to use those. So, I want you to look at this paragraph here. This is your prompt, the start, before her intro to her speech. Look at this. What's the vital information you need to know from this very first paragraph before you even look at her intro? Go through, underline the information you need to know in that.
I probably just left it in my folder.
Keep it back.
I only question one.
All right, let's go through this. What is one thing you underlined that was important to know? Katie.
Analyze how, is it Lucy?
Luce.
Luce uses this introduction to prepare the audience for the message.
Okay, so that is what you are being asked to do in your essay. Analyze how Luce uses this introduction to prepare the audience for her message. And that was something that people didn't really address, was this idea of preparing her audience for her message. So what kind of piece are you reading? It's a speech. So if we're preparing an audience, we need to know who that audience is, correct?
Yes.
Who's the audience?
The Women's National
Women's National Press Club. And who is the person that's giving the speech?
Journalist.
Claire Booth Luce. And she is what?
Journalist.
A journalist and...
A feminist.
No, doesn't say she's a feminist.
Whoa.
Politician.
She's a politician. What's the year?
This is
1960.
It's 1960. Are you going to read this speech in the same fashion, knowing that it's 1960 versus maybe thinking it was current day?
Yes.
No, you should not be reading it the same way.
That's what I meant.
What's going on in the 60s that might influence what she writes?
Awards.
Women's rights.
Civil rights.
Oh, we're getting over rights.
The women's movement is kind of starting.
The war on
Yeah.
Lots of things going on. Shh, listen. So you've got to take historical context into consideration when you're reading this as well. So we know she is a female journalist speaking to a bunch of what? Women what? Journalists. So the way she's going to prepare her female journalist audience would be different than if she was going to speak to, say, a group of male journalists, right?
Yes.
Yes. So, we need to figure out what she does. Couple of things to talk about. Shh, listen. Lots of us went to this idea of logos, ethos, pathos. And we really tried to use those as rhetorical devices. They are not devices. Listen, these logos, ethos, and pathos are results of a particular device or a particular writing style. They're not a device. They're a result. Something else that we kind of hung our hats on. Diction. Syntax. Which are fine, but every piece of writing has what? Diction and syntax. Why do I say that? What's diction? Words. What's syntax? Sentences. Every writing piece has to have them. So you need to address what makes them special. So an easy way to do that is to describe the kind of diction or the kind of syntax. So if I'm going to look at this piece and I'm going to describe its diction, I'm going to call Claire Booth Luce's diction self-deprecating. Why would I call her diction self-deprecating?
She's pointing out the flaws of journalism.
Not of journalism, self-deprecating.
Herself.
She's pointing out her own flaws.
Wasn't that to like kind of highlight like a broader?
It does, but she is criticizing herself in order to prepare the audience for what? Criticism of them. So her self-deprecating diction kind of creates this bond between herself, because she's criticizing herself, and the audience that she's about to criticize. So that's why this description of what kind of diction she's using is important. Because you can say any piece uses diction or syntax. That's not going to get you any points with readers. You got to tell me why it's special. Okay, the other thing that people used a lot of as trying to make it a device was tone. Tone, like logos, ethos, and pathos, not a device. It is a result, not a device.
That make mood a result too?
Yes, tone and mood, both results.
Process of information.
Okay, here's what I want you to do. With the people around you, I want you to go back through this piece, and I just want you to think about how does she prepare her audience for this message? What does she do? And don't try to give me like these fancy $10 rhetorical devices. I don't really care about that. If you can describe it in layman's terms effectively, that's fine. That can get you a 7. So, go back through, and I want you to figure out how she does it.